Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
I'm going to interrupt this portion of the program right now because we have two people here. One is Congressman William Pascarelle, who was really very instrumental in welcoming Allen Ginsberg back to Paterson. And I think we'll have somebody who used to write for the Morning Call, now writes for the New York Times, talking about the time when Allen was not welcomed in Paterson. And I would love to welcome Congressman William Pascarelle, and let's give him a big hand because he's been an enormous supporter of poetry, and how many politicians actually like poetry enough to sit through a 5-hour program something like 10 years ago.
This guy must be really weird. He likes poetry, yeah. To his memories, and to Eastside High School, and to his father, Eastside Park. Very good. Hi, Mrs. Zonnenberg. This is a very special day, and thank you for coming to our great city. I was the mayor not too long ago. I got demoted to be a congressman or something like that. But if you look at what's going on in this museum today, this little museum, in the midst of sweat and blood and tears of the working families of this country. I came an hour and a half ago from the Bottle House up in Hale, the only labor museum in the entire 50 states. So this is a very special day. But if you look at what's happening in the museum, an art show and a doll show and us, and I think that's fitting, Allen would understand. And so today I wanted to stop by. I have a crazy schedule, as you know, Marie, but I want you to come up here 1 second, if you will. This young lady,
be liberal.
This old lady,
it's true.
This young lady has done more for the arts and the crafts and the fine arts than anybody I know in this area. No one's done more. Back in the 80s at the Passaic County Community College, she was having meetings about poetry and having famous poets come in, and sometimes in the beginning very few people would show up.
Yeah, 3.
I was one of them.
I know, I remember that.
But she has stood the course. She is precious because she keeps the word of Allen Ginsberg perpetuated. That's how significant she is. She's important to our children, so we need to make sure we give her our support. The halls of Congress are not where it happens. It happens in the Paterson Museum. God bless you. Thank you.
Also, someone told me that Congressman Joey Torres is here. Now, I've spoken to him on the phone, but I don't know what he looks like. So if Congressman Joey Torres, who, I must say, led the fight for a memorial, a lasting and permanent memorial in the city of Paterson, in the city council, when he was being attacked and practically hit with a sledgehammer because he wanted to do this. If Congressman Torres, wherever you are, Congressman Torres, let's welcome Congressman Torres, because we do need politicians who understand that poetry comes in many forms. Thank you. It's good to meet you, dear.
It definitely has been a pleasure to talk and converse with Maria over what would be fitting in tribute to Allen. As one of Paterson's native son, it was very important for me as a legislator to, as no matter how controversial Allen may have been, the fact of the matter that we have to give respect and credit where credit is due, and respect is due. So I arrived a little late at the park, so when you saw me giving that flower, I just thought it would be fitting, and the rest I discarded it into the falls. because I think it symbolizes what nature and community and love, all those main ingredients are needed to grow together as one. So it's a pleasure for me to be here, and we will continue to fight to pay a real true tribute. This is just a marking of a tribute, but to complete it with some things that we have working in committee. So I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Our next speaker is Elliot Katz, and Elliot is a New Jersey poet who was very much encouraged by Alan, and who also has tried himself to be very encouraging to other people, who has worked as a social activist and social worker in New Jersey, as well as working on his own wonderful electric poetry. Let's welcome Elliot Katz.
Thanks, Maria. It's an honor to be here. I wrote a combination tribute remembrance for today. Allen Ginsberg was easily the most visionary American poet of our time. His poems were filled with keen perceptiveness, radiant poetic imagination, remarkable formal inventiveness, a unique mixture of humor and information, and an energetic yearning for healthier human possibilities. In both his poetry and his life, Allen showed 4 decades of young people that we did not have to accept the deadwood of exploitation and hypocrisy. We could dig through the status quo to change it. Allen raised our consciousness, made us laugh, and set an inspiring, lifelong example of how to combine a literary life with progressive social commitment, spiritual compassion, and personal integrity. He left a poetic and political legacy that will stand as challenge and inspiration for generations to come. Allen spent countless hours nurturing and supporting younger poets, offering helpful suggestions about manuscripts, assisting small press journals, sitting for hours after poetry readings to answer questions, suggesting reading lists, sending poems that he liked to publishers. I met Allen briefly in 1976 in New Brunswick before a reading he was scheduled to give that night. Danny and I were sitting on our front porch when Allen pulled up. I think Danny Schott is going to talk a little bit about that later, so I'm going to just skip over that part. I'd only recently read Hale and Whitman's Song of Myself and decided to start writing poetry. A few weeks later, I sent Allen samples of my earliest poems, to which he generously responded, taking about 10 lines of my verse and suggesting deletions and clarifications which might make the poem better. He also suggested reading Williams, Resnikov, and Pound. Allen probably would have remembered our meeting at Naropa Institute in the summer of 1980, when I took his course on William Blake and did a 1-month poetry apprenticeship with him. I typed his difficult-to-read manuscripts and received incredibly helpful suggestions about my early poems. Although my work at the time wasn't very good, I think Allen appreciated my political activist inclinations. The politics in Allen's work, from Hale and America through Wichita Vortex Sutra to the late 1970s Plutonian Ode, had been a large part of what attracted me to his poetry, of what made his poetry seem especially relevant and urgent. As his apprentice for a month, in addition to getting great literary advice, I also got a chance to see up close Allen's principled commitment to opposing injustice and his extraordinary desire to help young people work to create a better world, a more peaceful, tolerant, and democratic future. One day, while I was reading a letter to Allen from a formerly imprisoned East Bloc writer, a young Boulder peace activist came in to drop off photocopies of a poem Allen had written for an upcoming rally against draft registration, which the American government was then reintroducing for the first time since the Vietnam War. Just a few weeks earlier, these young peace activists had asked Allen for a poem they could use on their poster to promote their demonstration. Allen decided to write a new one, especially for them, and upon request penned an amazing topical poem called Verses Written for Student Anti-Draft Registration Rally 1980. The poem redefined courage. Quote, "The warrior never goes to war, only helpless draftees fight afraid. The warrior knows his own sad and tender heart, which is not the heart of most newspapers, which is not the heart of most television. This kind of sadness doesn't sell popcorn." With humor and imagination, the poem described an uncommon courage, actually the sort of personal and political courage that Allen displayed throughout his life. Conventional mythology says that 1960s radicals became more conservative as they got older. Allen's life and work helped put the lie to that myth. Allen just got sharper and better able to explain his groundbreaking ideas and observations in clear, concise, cogent, energetic language that was difficult for any open-minded person to refute. Throughout the 17 years that I knew Allen as generous teacher and friend, his progressive social commitment never wavered. He understood that political issues were often complex, that it wasn't always easy to say one side was right and the other wrong. I remember once in 1990, at Manhattan's Kiev restaurant, soon after Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution, Allen told me this heart-wrenching story that was developing in Prague's literary scene. Some Czech writers had recently expressed anger and betrayal toward a formerly celebrated publisher, renowned for willingness to put out books challenging the authoritarian Soviet-backed regime, as well as books by some Beat Generation writers. After that regime was toppled, files were found which revealed that liberal publisher had once passed activist names to the Czech secret police. The reason? His son was in desperate need of a life-saving kidney transplant, and government doctors refused to operate without a few names handed over. Allen expressed compassion for the writers and the publishers on that one. When political injustices were clear, Allen was always there to speak up. He was clear in his principles, a prophetic poet giving body to human error in the tradition of William Blake, and carrying on Walt Whitman's democratic vision for America. While opposing repressive Soviet-style alternatives, Allen spoke out against the greedy, Western big business modes of poverty-inducing international bullying exploitation, usually ignored or trivialized by America's mainstream press. Allen's X-ray eyes always saw right through the official explanations used to rationalize harmful government policy. Over the last 15 years, I saw Allen on average every few months, sometimes over coffee or dinner after one of his Manhattan readings. Often he would spend some time dissecting corporate media's version of the day's news. I remember one long conversation deconstructing George Bush's ridiculous and contradictory explanations for starting the Gulf War. Last year at his East 12th Street kitchen table, he showed me a pile of Orwellian-sounding FBI files, which his perceptiveness and persistence had garnered through the years. From his outspokenness against Eisenhower-era political and sexual repression to his protests against the Vietnam War, from his willingness to sit on Rocky Flats railroad tracks to stop the manufacture of plutonium, to his outspokenness against censorship east and west, Allen always put his body and his poetry on the line. He was out front on so many issues. I still find myself reading news stories with the urge to ask Allen next time I see him, what did he think of that version of reality? Throughout the 80s and 90s, the years I knew him, Allen remained steadfast in his support for young writers and activists, often on unheralded grassroots projects. A few of the projects I worked on to which Allen lent his support included a New Brunswick anti-apartheid arts campaign, an anti-Gulf War reading at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in Manhattan, and an effort in the late 1980s to build a new national student activist group. At a conference at Rutgers in 1988 called National Student Convention 88, which brought together 700 student activists from around the country, and with Abby Hoffman in the audience, Allen gave an inspired reading and advised student activists to make sure they learned to separate their disagreement with government policies from any anger they might feel toward their parents. Unfortunately, not all of the activists at the conference had come to the reading. Some were busy in another room burning their cafeteria dinner tickets. Of course, Allen was also generous with young poets, including New Jersey poets, on literary matters. He helped Danny Schott and I start Long Shot Literary Magazine by donating encouragement and part of his fee from an early 80s Rutgers reading. He also contributed new work to about half of the 19 issues of Longshot that have come out so far, including a recent politics issue that I guest edited with permanent editors Danny Schott, Nancy Mercado, Lynn Breitfeller, and Mike Kramer. For the last 15 years, Alan periodically sent my work, along with the work of other young poets, to editors and publishers. He wrote an introduction to my first book of poems in 1990 and offered to write the intro for my next in order to help convince Coffee House Press to take it. I'll always be incredibly grateful for his support, generosity, and friendship. Like everyone here in Paterson today, and millions throughout the world, I celebrate his life and I miss him terribly. Lucky for the planet, his words live on. Thank you.
Did I forget to say that Elliot is also one of the nicest people in the universe himself? The next speaker is Peter Hale, and Peter Hale is involved with in working with the Allen Ginsberg Trust, and I really only met Peter for the first time today, so I find myself not having a great deal to say, but I'm sure he'll tell us about himself and his connection with Allen Ginsberg and be clearer than I could be. Let's welcome Peter Hale.
Give myself a little introduction. I worked with Alan for 5 years, the last 5 years, and working with Bob, certainly a lot of fun and a very educational experience. I'm going to read the last poem that he'd written up in his journal before he died. This is about, well, it's March 30th, like 4 days before he died. But there was a real mad rush at the very end to get everything typed up, and he was going to revise it. We had stacks and stacks of poems. And that was, he didn't type, he didn't like to type, so that actually provided work for other people. He'd handwrite the poems, I'd type them up, and he'd rewrite them, arrows, circles, lines, X's, and so on. So this one he actually never saw typed up, but it looked like he worked on it quite a bit. He'd crossed things out, circled them around. It was almost impossible to read. It had us running around for a few days trying to figure out what some of these things were. There's a lot of place names, for instance, and ones that none of us had ever heard of. Because that was always the educational part. You think, oh, where was that? That's not a word. Or this isn't a word. And then you pull out the big OED or something, and there it is, this obscure word that he learned somewhere in his vocabulary. So this one, it's Things I'll Not Do. He had been planning trips and more trips in the last month. Even though he was very sick, he thought, well, I'll recover, I'll go to Italy and just have a relaxing trip there. And then he's having Bob look up for invitations to Bulgaria and other parts of Eastern Europe as well. So some of that's in here. So it's Things I'll Not Do. Never Go to Bulgaria had a booklet, an invitation. Same Albania, invited last year privately by lottery scammers or recovering alcoholics or enlightened poets of the antique land of Hades' gates. Nor visit Lhasa, live in Hilton or Nawang Gelik's household and weary ascend Patala. Nor ever return to Kashi, oldest continuously habited city in the world. Bathe in Ganges, sit again at Manikarnika Ghat with Peter. Visit Lord Jagannath again in Puri. Never back to Birboom, take notes, tales of Kaki Baba. Or hear music festivals in Madras with Philip. Or return to have chai with older Shunil, the young coffee shop poets. Or tie my head on a block in the Chinatown opium den, passed by Muslim Hotel, its rooftop, Tinsmith Street, Chudri Chow, Nimtala burning ground, nor smoke ganja on the Hooghly, nor the alleyways of Ahmed's Fez, never more drink mint tea at Soko Chico, visit Paul Bowles in Tangier, or see the Sphinx in desert at sunrise or sunset, morn and dusk in the desert, ancient collapsed Beirut, sad bombed Babylon and Ur of old, Syria's grim mysteries, all Arabian Saudi deserts, Yemen's sprightly folk, old opium tribal Afghanistan, Tibet templed Baluchistan, see Shanghai again, nor cares of Dunhuang, nor climb East 12th Street's stairway 3 flights again, nor go to literary Argentina, accompany Glass to Sao Paulo, and live a month in a flat, Rio's beaches and favela boys, Bahia's great carnival. Nor more daydream of Bali, too far Adelaide's festival to get new song sticks, not see the new slums of Jakarta, mysterious Borneo forests and painted men and women. No more Sunset Boulevard, Melrose Avenue, Oz on Ocean Way, old cousin Danny Legant, memories of Aunt Edith in Santa Monica. No more sweet summers with lovers, teaching Blake at Naropa, mind-writing slogans, new modern American poets, Williams, Kerouac, Reznikov, Rakosi, Corso, Creeley, Orlovsky. Any visits to Benai Israel graves of Baba, Aunt Rose, Harry Meltzer, Aunt Clara, Father Louis? Not myself, except in an urn of ashes. So thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everyone.
Our next speaker is Rochelle Crowd, and Rochelle, obviously this was used by somebody much taller than myself. Our next speaker is Rochelle Crowd, and Rochelle is not only a poet and admirer of Allen Ginsberg's work, she is also known Allen Ginsberg for as many years as Bob Rosenthal, I assume, since she's married to Bob Rosenthal. I always hate when somebody introduces me as my husband's wife, although I got back at him once in Sicily at a conference where somebody said to him, "Oh, you're Mrs. Maria Gillen." He was very insulted, needless to say. So Rochelle, I'll introduce her as a wonderful poet who has some interesting things to say about Allen Ginsberg in remembrance of Allen Ginsberg.
This is, I was just, when Elliot was talking about the typing for Allen, I just realized that the first time I met Allen was in early 1975, when someone, I don't remember who, another poet called and said, "Oh, would you do some typing for Allen? He needs it was a habeas corpus for Timothy Leary." And I said, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll do that." And, you just had your little, manual typewriter, and I was so nervous. But when Allen came over, when we lived on East 12th Street, the same place that he had lived, moved in later. And actually, Bob reminded me that when he came over to do that typing, where I typed for the Leary corpus, there was an empty apartment in our building, and he was sort of asking about looking to move, and we told him about it, and then he moved in a few years later, where he lived for already over 20 years until recently. But I thought it was funny that I guess that's sort of a way that a lot of people got with Allen, or got kind of like exposed to Allen, or got initiated into Allen, was through typing in some way. And the other odd thing was, one of the last things, not the last thing I did, but when we found out that Allen was so gravely ill, and there was this big rush to type up, Allen wanted to see all of his poems that had been writing in his journal, and he wanted to do all this editing, at the last couple of weeks of his life, and there was this big push to type things up, and it was very busy and crazy. And I said to Bob, "I'll come in and type in the office." And he called me before I came in that day, and he said, "Would you look up the word Kinderlach?" And we have a Joys of Yiddish at home, so I looked up in Leo Roston's Joy of Yiddish, and Kinderlach, meaning in the diminutive, little children, and in the actual explanation of it said, to express special affection to friends, a gathering, a dinner party, a committee. One may say, well, Kinderlach. So when I think about that, it's like, it's not just children, literally, it's really people coming together joining together, and like people here are, I guess in some way we're all Alan's children. Definitely influenced by him. Anyway, I didn't know, there's so many things to say, how Alan was such a good, kind of a good friend and involved with the family. We have 2 children, and it's a funny thing you said about the naming. He used to, when Alan came over that one time to do the typing, it was then several years later that Bob started to work for him as a secretary, but I was very nervous, and I remembered he came over, and he was just not anything like I thought he was going to be. Alan wasn't a big ego. He was so humble. He was so grateful that someone was going to type this thing for him. He seemed like not at all what I was going to expect. Oh, the great Allen Ginsberg, oh my God, bigger than life. He was just so shy and quiet and soft-spoken and, you know, almost like, you know, grateful, you know, in a way. But to get back to, now I'm losing my train of thought. At the end of his life, right before he went into the hospital, I guess there was something about this, about the gathering. It was Alan had made a huge fish soup. Sometimes I would make soup at home and make sure I didn't add any salt to it so that Bob could bring some home to Alan so he could have some soup without salt, because he couldn't have any salt. And a few times I had made some fish soup and he loved it. Right before he got sick, he wanted to make this big fish soup. He made a huge vat of soup the week before he went into the hospital. And I'd been over to his apartment a few times, and he kept asking me, what else can I put into this? I mean, he put everything into this soup. I mean, whole clams. I said, Alan, maybe you'd like to steam the clams separately and then take it out and put the meat in. He said, oh, no, put the shells in. It was seaweed, potatoes, ginger, everything you could imagine, because he couldn't put salt in the soup. And actually it tasted pretty good, but it was there was a lot of stuff in it. We still have it frozen in the freezer because you know, he got sick right after that, and I made a joke. It was kind of horrible. I said, he went into the hospital, I think it was the 21st of March, and I said to Bob, you know, he made himself sick making that soup. And he kept asking, what else can you put into the soup? I said, parsley, Alan? Did you put parsley or dill in it? And he said, oh yeah, I could put that in too. Anyway, one of these days we're going to defrost it and really do a kind of a food anthropologist thing and take it apart and make a list for Alan's last soup. But in the meantime, I'm going to finish off by singing a song, one of Alan's poems, Gospel Noble Truths. And I'll just put this away a little bit. Born in this world, you got to suffer. Everything changes. You got no soul. Try to be gay, ignorant, happy. You get the blues. You eat jelly roll. There is one way. You take the high road in your big wheel. 8 steps you fly. Look at the view. Right to horizon. Talk to the sky. Act like you talk. Work like the sun, shine in your heaven, see what you've done, come down and walk. Sit, you sit down, breathe when you breathe, lie down, you lie down, walk where you walk, talk when you talk, cry when you cry, lie down, you lie down, die when you die, look when you look, hear what you hear, taste what you taste, hear, smell what you smell, touch what you touch, think what you think, let it go, slow, earth, heaven, and hell, die when you die, die when you die, lie down, you lie down, die when you die, die when you die, die when you die, lie down, you lie down, die when you die.